Hey guys, alright? Welcome everyone. We begin in the year 1983, seeing two cosmonauts aboard the station known as Orbit 4 orbiting Earth. One of them is singing and teasing the other called Kostya, saying he'll report him to mission control for not doing the same. They talk about what they'll do when they get home while mission control checks on them. Kostya unlocks the docking latches, and they undock. The other cosmonaut sings again as they enter the landing position, but something hits the spacecraft. They regain control, but the singing cosmonaut sees something moving outside the window towards the hatch. Later, a parachute is seen in the sky over Soviet Kazakhstan. A man on horseback approaches the crashed spacecraft. He lights a lantern and finds one of the cosmonauts dead next to the ship. The other is crawling out of the ship, barely able to stand, as the man approaches. When the cosmonaut lifts his head, blood comes from his mouth, and his eyes are completely black. A woman enters a conference room at the AMS Brain Research Institute in Moscow. The room is being set up for a hearing. The council members enter, and the hearing begins. Tatiana is being investigated about an injury she possibly inflicted on a patient. Her fellow council members don't doubt her methods but still think a certain level of negligence should be considered. She disagrees, saying she did what needed to be done on a misdiagnosed patient. A man is observing the hearing and later approaches Tatiana in the lobby. He introduces himself as Colonel Semiradov and asks for her consulting help on a patient, saying he also runs a form of research institute. She's a bit apprehensive but becomes interested when he says he's also involved in neuropsychiatry. Semiradov tells her he'll take her to see the patient, but if she doesn't want to work on the case, he'll bring her back. On the way, in a helicopter, they discuss the patient. She asks for his medical files, but instead, he gives her an oral report. He tells her the patient is one of the Orbit 4 cosmonauts and explains that certain things were omitted from the media. Kostya seems to be suffering from episodic amnesia, not remembering the incident that happened in space before the ship landed. She asks if she should sign a non-disclosure agreement, considering the cosmonaut, a Soviet national hero, may have lost his mind. They arrive in Kazakhstan and take a car to the Scientific Research Institute. Once there, Semiradov informs her she can move freely in 90% of the institute, and after obtaining her authorization, she could enter the restricted area as well. They enter an elevator that takes them to an observation room. Meanwhile, Kostya is being hypnotized by a psychiatrist. Tatiana watches the session from the other side of the glass. The psychiatrist wants to extract information from the cosmonaut, but he just toys with him. The doctor gets annoyed, saying he can't help him if he doesn't let him, and then the man coughs, leaving the doctor nervous. Kostya tells him he can't be hypnotized since only the mentally strongest can be sent into space. Dr. Rigel enters from the other side of the room, greeted by Semiradov, who tells Tatiana he's the institute's research director. The cosmonaut taps on the glass and asks what happened to his colleague. Tatiana asks what Colonel Semiradov needs, and he says he needs her opinion on his condition. She walks to the other side of the glass and introduces herself. Kostya is pleased with the change of Rigel. She offers him some tea, which he accepts and drinks. Tatiana watches all his movements and tells him why she's there, then asks about the toy in the corner. He replies that it's his, something related to cosmonaut traditions. She asks what happened during the mission, but he's tired of doing that again. As she hasn't read the files, he still tells her that the mission went smoothly until the landing procedure, after which he can't remember anything except waking up at the institute. He realizes she can't help him get out of there, though when she says she can at least try to help him, Kostya gives her his mother's name and number, asking Tatiana to tell her that he's alive and well. She takes the tea and before leaving, says it was nice meeting him. When she hands the teacup to Rigel, it burns his hands, and she explains to Colonel that Kostya has PTSD and that his sensory receptors or peripheral nervous system may be damaged. After giving her assessment, she asks to leave. Semiradov tells her she can leave in the morning. The soldier escorting her to the room informs her that the colonel would need to authorize her departure tomorrow. As they walk, they see some people working under supervision. To her question about them, the soldier responds that they are prisoners, brought in to do hard labor. He takes her to her room and tells her she's the only one in the building. Tatiana enters her room, unpacks her bags, and then wants to make an external call, only to be informed that no one can do that on the base except Semiradov. That night, she is taking a bath, and a giant scar is seen on her back. She takes some painkillers and goes to bed, but unable to sleep, she goes out for a run. Back in her room, there's a knock on the door. It's Semiradov. He takes her back to the observation room and asks when was the last time she ate. When she answers, he checks the clock and gives the order to begin. A reinforced glass window appears in Kostya's room, and more soldiers enter, ensuring security. Tatiana and the others watch the security cameras as something starts to happen to Kostya's body. Suddenly, he falls off the bed, and something is coming out of his mouth. The mask transforms into an alien creature. The scene leaves Tatiana stunned and in disbelief. Semiradov asks if she wants to take a closer look. She goes to the glass window and waits to see the creature. It doesn't take long, and it appears. Both stare at each other until Tatiana reaches out to it, but it jumps at the window. She exits the room shocked and terrified. Semiradov rushes to her and says the creature is not of this earth. Tatiana wants to know if Kostya is aware that there's a creature inside him, but apparently, he doesn't know. The colonel wants her to find a way to separate the host from the parasite, or she could leave and sign the non-disclosure agreement. She asks why he chose her for the task, and he replies that it's because she's willing to take risks. In his mind, this would save their national hero. Tatiana asks for the videotapes of the creature, Kostya's testimony, and all the notes they have. She will need to have 2 sessions a day with him, 1 hour each. The colonel is pleased that Tatiana has stayed. Tatiana goes through the documents and finds out that the cosmonaut was first placed in a rehabilitation center, but the creature emerged on the first night and killed a medical technician. Then they brought him to the facility and started trying to separate the man from the creature, although nothing has worked so far. Without the creature inside him, the cosmonaut's vital signs drop, but with the creature inside, he has incredible regeneration capabilities. When the creature is incubating, it takes up very little space inside Kostya's body. And outside the cosmonaut, it can reach up to 1.5 meters. Coming out of his body, it releases a toxin that knocks out Kostya, and once it exits, it can stay out for almost 2 hours. Its departure time has remained consistent every night. Tatiana wonders if it could be a parasite or a symbiote. Kostya is seen exercising in a gym, under a doctor's supervision, who tells him not to overexert himself. The cosmonaut says he generally feels fine but just has a slight itch in his throat. Later, Tatiana is looking at images of the creature and jotting down some numbers. Rigel enters, and she asks about the whereabouts of Kostya's son, but he doesn't really respond. Then, she asks what the creature feeds on, and he says it feeds on the same things Kostya eats. She tries to establish a rapport with the doctor, but he brushes off her attempts and tells her to speak with the colonel. In Colonel Semiradov's office, she calls the orphanage where Kostya's son is living. The next day, Tatiana enters Kostya's room for their session. She tells him that the people who brought her to the institute think he's lost his mind and that he killed his co-pilot. Rigel and the colonel are listening from the other side, and the doctor is not happy with her questions, while the colonel is puzzled. The cosmonaut questions why they would think that about him and if that's the only reason he's being kept behind reinforced glass. She asks who he really is, and in response, he says he's a hero. Tatiana antagonizes him about the heroism of spaceflight and quickly moves on to ask about his son, saying he abandoned him. He's offended and asks her to leave the session. From the other side of the window, she tells them to test his endocrine system, thinking that if they understand his hormone levels under stress, they may figure out what the creature feeds on. Next, she asks the colonel to move him to the civilian area during the day so they can get a more realistic clinical picture. Semiradov complies with her request and gives Kostya a regular room. Tatiana enters his room and apologizes, explaining why she did what she did in the session. He tells her he didn't know about the boy, that he was informed of his existence when his mother died a week before the mission. Before leaving, he asks her one last question to tell him why he's really being kept there. However, Tatiana can't answer that question. That night, she enters the observation room to see the alien creature. She tries to knock on the window to get its attention, but then crouches down and waits for it to appear. When it does, she lies down, and the creature mimics her behavior. Tatiana disturbs the cosmonaut's toy when she gets up and notices the way the creature looks at it, then asks to enter the room. The colonel allows it, so she's suited up. She enters the room and puts the toy down for the creature. Immediately, it goes to it and wraps itself around it. Tatiana wants to touch the creature, but slips and falls. The creature grabs her and drags her inside, then the general lights her up with lights, and Tatiana is taken away from the room. That night, Tatiana is in her room, and the colonel enters uninvited. She proceeds to explain to him what she learned from the incident with the toy. She thinks the creature and the cosmonaut share the same consciousness because of the way it reacted to the toy, which means a lot to Kostya. Additionally, she believes that every night it spends more time outside Kostya's body and will eventually no longer need him. Tatiana asks the colonel to take them to Moscow, but he refuses, knowing it won't be possible because of how much they don't know about the creature. Later, she goes to talk to Rigel and notices something wrong with one of the videotapes. He says it's a glitch, but she confronts him with the difference in the cosmonaut's hormone levels between day and night. She thinks they feed the creature with something they're not sharing with her. Rigel tells her to get out while she still can. But she thinks he wants a Nobel Prize and offers to help him get it without her own accolades. Tatiana asks for the missing information to be given to her without the colonel's knowledge. Rigel hides her in his vehicle and secretly takes her to the restricted part of the facility. Meanwhile, Kostya has been sedated, and after passing out, he's taken back to the observation room. Rigel parks the car inside the facility and gives Tatiana night vision binoculars, saying the battery only lasts for 10 minutes. He leaves the car, and a large cage can be seen, with some soldiers taking a prisoner from a truck and putting him inside it. They turn off the lights, and everyone uses night vision binoculars. The creature has exited Kostya's body and was guided to the cage. Tatiana watches it from the car as it approaches the prisoner, then attacks him and rips his head off. It makes a sound, and one of the soldiers hears it inside the car. Rigel distracts the soldier's attention, and he doesn't find her. Later, he takes her back to the dormitory and gives her water, along with some additional information. He found out that the creature feeds on cortisol, the fear hormone released in the brain. But he tells her that feeding it with humans was the colonel's idea. She exits the car calling him a coward. The next day, Tatiana asks Kostya to run with her. While they run, she tells him about the creature and that they need government help to separate them. Understanding what she knows, he decides to go back. Kostya tells her to watch if she's being followed and meet him in his block at 1 in the morning. That night, they give him his pills, but when they leave, he vomits them. He crushes the pills and puts them in his tea. Then, he leaves his room and talks to the nurse guarding him, asking her to come in and watch a movie with him. After she drinks the tea, she falls asleep. Kostya dismantles the TV and takes out the magnet. He meets Tatiana. Then, he puts the magnet on the camera, which will create an error. The guard sees that something is wrong and goes down to check the camera, but when he finds nothing, he leaves, and they can pass freely in front of him. Kostya and Tatiana go to the freezer room where he sees the bodies. There are scans of his body too. She asks him if he can feel the creature inside. He says he is the creature and that he can remember everything in detail from what she saw. Kostya tells her that if Semiradov knew, he would never let him go. His co-pilot is also there, but he's alive. He begs Tatiana to help him, enduring 2 more weeks at the institute until a Moscow review board arrives, and he can be released. She asks him how he could endure the creature killing people for 2 more weeks. But, he asks her what she would have done in his place. Tatiana replies that she would kill him. Kostya doesn't want to be guilty of feeding the creature with people or die there after all he's been through. He wants to live and get his son. Back at the institute, Tatiana is heading back to her room when 2 soldiers surround her and take her to the colonel's office. They argue about the moral aspects of the situation with the creature, with him firmly believing he's doing the right thing in the name of peace. Tatiana doesn't think human sacrifices are necessary, but the colonel tells her what kind of prisoners the men are. He suggests they go to the feeding site together so she can see up close. At the site, we see that 2 prisoners are placed inside the cage, and the creature is released. It continues to approach the men, and Tatiana begs the colonel to stop, saying she'll find another way to feed it. Then she asks to enter the cage with the creature. She starts singing the same song she heard Kostya sing before, and the creature calms down. The doctor and the colonel watch her do this, and the doctor exclaims that the creature has adapted, and it can now hear. While Tatiana sings to the creature, Kostya is seen reacting in his room as well, no longer unconscious. One of the prisoners undoes his restraints, and the creature hears him move. It attacks and kills him. After the feeding, the colonel asks Tatiana if Kostya can control the creature. She tells him he still can't do it. With her help, Semiradov thinks they will eventually learn to control the creature. He asks her to set aside their differences. The next day, Tatiana is working in the room with the co-pilot when Rigel enters. She starts talking to him in Latin, asking him to help her and Kostya escape. He doesn't want to, but she tells him to be a man. Later, Rigel brings the sedative she needed but asks her not to tell anyone he helped her. Tatiana goes to the guard and knocks him out. Then she asks the doctor to help once again. He goes with her to get Kostya. When she enters his room, she finds him on the floor. She tells him the colonel will do anything to keep the creature there. Furthermore, she has found a way to remove the creature from him by injecting him with a combination of drugs that will mimic a specific disease. He doesn't want to do it, afraid that the creature has adapted and will survive outside of him. Also, he thinks the creature saved his life and tells her to leave him there because she chose him for some reason, and somehow, that's his punishment for abandoning his son. She tells him his son's name and age, then he changes his mind and goes with her. The doctor tells them there's a car outside and gives her the keys. Tatiana asks him to go with them, but he decides to stay. The two of them leave, and Rigel goes to the colonel's office to make a call to the authorities and give them information about the institute. Simultaneously, another soldier finds the sedated guard. They check the footage and see that Tatiana and Kostya are fleeing. The colonel orders a response team to be sent, to bring Kostya alive and eliminate Tatiana. The response team finds them and stops them. Back in the office, Rigel is still on the phone when someone tries to enter. He ends the call as the colonel enters the office, and without questions, he kills him. Meanwhile, Tatiana and Kostya are hiding from the soldiers when he asks for the syringe with the drugs. She tosses it to him, and he injects the drugs into his heart. The creature leaves his body and faces the soldiers. They shoot at the creature, but it starts killing them. Tatiana drags Kostya into a car, and they escape from the compound. Eventually, the colonel confronts the creature. He releases a smoke bomb and starts shooting at it. Both are injured, but the colonel shoots again. At the same time, Kostya spits blood in the car. Tatiana realizes he won't survive without the creature. He says they can still escape, but she drags him out of the car. The colonel catches up to them and asks her if she changed her mind. She says they become fully symbiotic and cannot be separated, while the soldiers remove the creature from the trunk. The colonel takes the gun Tatiana was holding and immobilizes her, while the soldiers open the compartment with the creature. Kostya manages to control the creature, and it kills the soldiers. He then goes after the colonel and kills him too. Tatiana checks if Kostya is still alive while the creature crawls towards them. She doesn't kill it and goes back into Kostya's body. Tatiana tells him she can separate them if she can take him to Moscow. Suddenly, Kostya ends his own life, as the authorities to whom the doctor had called arrive at the scene. Days later, Tatiana is heading to Rostov, where the orphanage with Kostya's son is located. Tatiana enters the orphanage and tells the guard at the reception that she's there to adopt Kostya's son. A few moments later, we see Tatiana waiting outside for the boy. He comes out, and she greets him, and then they embrace.